The silence broke with a single sound. A bronze star slipped from its velvet cushion, struck the marble floor, and rang out like a bell of memory. Every head in the crowd turned. The medal once pinned to the chest of a fallen soldier rolled in a slow circle before coming to rest at the boots of the guard. Gasps echoed. Children clutched their parents. A line of veterans in the back stiffened, their jaws tight, eyes wet. Cameras snapped as reporters leaned forward. This was no ordinary slip of metal. This was honor, lying exposed on the ground. And yet, the guard did not bend. He stood immovable, his rifle held steady, his face fixed in timeless stillness. Sweat traced the edge of his brow, but not a muscle twitched. His training demanded it. His oath required it. Even here, even now, when every instinct inside a man might scream to act, he did not. That was when the laughter began. From the front row, a man in a sharp suit stepped forward. He was not a veteran nor a mourner. His polished shoes clicked against the stone as he approached, lips curled in mockery. Well, he taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. Isn't that your job, hero? Pick it up, or is honor too heavy today? The crowd shifted uneasily. Some turned away, others glared. A mother pulled her child closer. The man's grin widened, sensing his audience. He tilted his head, eyes glittering with provocation, as though daring the guard to abandon his sacred post. Still, the guard did not move. The silence stretched, heavier than the stone columns rising. Behind them, the fallen medal gleamed in the sunlight, its reflection quivering across the polished floor. It seemed to whisper of sacrifice, of blood spilled far away, of comrades who never came home. But the man only smirked. Look at you, frozen like a statue. All that discipline, and for what? He chuckled, loud and cruel, as though his words could shatter the discipline that had carried the guard through war, through grief, through nights of memory too heavy to bear. The crowd braced, waiting for the soldier to bend, waiting for the oath to break, and then an emotion no one expected filled the air. Not rage, not weakness, but something deeper. The stillness itself became a message. The world thought he would step aside, that he would stoop and surrender, but in that moment, under the weight of silence, with the bronze star at his feet, everyone saw what honor truly means. The stillness of that moment held the crowd. But to understand why the guard did not move, one must look deeper into the life that shaped him, the oath that bound him, and the man who now sought to tear it apart. His name was Captain Daniel Reeves. Long before he stood in ceremonial uniform, silent and immovable, he was a soldier in the deserts of war. Reeves had been 22 when he first deployed, young, eager, and certain that courage could erase fear. The days were long and merciless. Mortar fire lit the sky, helicopters thundered overhead, and the desert wind carried the taste of sand into every meal. He learned to sleep only in fragments, boots never unlaced, rifle never far from reach. In those days of chaos, he met Corporal James Cole, though everyone called him Jimmy. Jimmy had the kind of spirit that seemed impossible in such a place. He cracked jokes in the dirt, handed out candy bars from home, and carried a folded photograph of his younger sister in the chest pocket of his vest. Around the firelight of their camp, he would speak of building a cabin in the mountains once. The war was done, a place where silence meant peace, not danger. Reeves and Jimmy became brothers, forged not by blood but by the crucible of battle. That bond was broken in an instant. A convoy mission went wrong, an ambush that erupted before their unit had time to prepare. Reeves remembered the way Jimmy's voice cut through the chaos. Calm and commanding even as the ground shook. He remembered the crack of gunfire, the flash of light, and then the explosion that tore everything apart. When the smoke cleared, Reeves was alive. Jimmy was not. What remained was silence, broken only by Reeves's ragged breath, and later, the Bronze Star awarded in Jimmy's honor. From that day forward, Reeves carried more than a rifle. He carried memory, guilt, and a vow that would never leave him. He would never again fail the men who stood beside him. When he came home, the war did not release its grip. He woke drenched in sweat at the sound of phantom gunfire. Crowds pressed in on him like enemy ambushers. Fireworks and car backfires dragged him back to places he wanted to forget. But beneath the scars and sleepless nights, there was something steady. The belief that discipline could quiet the chaos. That belief led him to the ceremonial guard. It was there, among marble stones and eternal flames, that Reeves found something. Like peace, stillness became his weapon, silence became his shield. Every precise step, every perfectly timed turn of his rifle was an act of remembrance. Standing watch was no longer duty alone, it was communion. When he stood in uniform, he was not alone. He felt Jimmy beside him, unseen but present in every breath. The Bronze Star was his most guarded possession. It was more than metal. It was memory. It was blood. It was the last echo of a brother's laughter. On this day it had been placed in a display of tribute, a symbol of sacrifice for the gathered crowd. Its sudden fall to the floor was more than an accident. To Reeves, it was the universe testing the strength of his vow, and in that same moment, across from him stood a man who saw none of this. Judge Marcus Holden was a figure known for his sharp tongue and sharper ambition. Where others saw memorials, as sacred, Holden saw them as stages. He was a politician in robes, a man who thrived on spectacle, and he had long built his career by mocking institutions he considered outdated. Military service, tradition, discipline, he dismissed them all as relics of a past too heavy to carry. Holden had arrived that day not to honor but to posture. He wore a smile that never touched his eyes, polished shoes that clicked on the stone like a challenge, and a gaze that searched the crowd for attention rather than reverence. To him, the fallen medal was no symbol of sacrifice. It was an opportunity. As the Bronze Star lay at Reeves's boots, Holden moved forward, savoring each step. He tilted his head, smirk tugging at his lips, and with a voice loud enough for all to hear, he mocked the silence. He called the medal just a trinket, sneered that soldiers were statues who mistook obedience for strength, and dared Reeves to abandon his post. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty beneath the words. Some stared at the ground, unwilling to meet the moment. Others bristled with anger, veterans especially, their hands clenched at their sides. Parents pulled children closer, as if shielding them from something sour in the air. Cameras clicked, catching every flicker of Holden's performance. Reeves did not move, he did not blink. To the crowd it seemed like silence. To Reeves, it was the weight of everything: Jimmy's voice, the promise made at his graveside, the countless names carved in stone around him. Each second he held his ground, the silence deepened, until even Holden's mockery could not drown it. That was the man who now stood across from the guard, a man who thrived on attention, who sought to humiliate, who believed discipline was weakness, and opposite him, Daniel Reeves, who had buried a brother in arms, who carried memory like armor, who stood not for himself, but for all who could no longer stand. The stage was set. The medal lay gleaming on the floor between them. One man saw nothing but metal. The other saw a lifetime of sacrifice, and the crowd waited, held in breathless suspense, to see which would break first: the silence of honor or the noise of arrogance. The hush around the fallen medal lingered like smoke. Judge Marcus Holden's smirk sharpened as he stepped closer, reveling in the silence he mistook for weakness. His shoes struck the stone with measured rhythm, each click echoing through the memorial grounds as though he were announcing himself as master of the moment. The crowd shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the medal glinting on the floor and the guard who refused to move. Holden crouched, not to honor the Bronze Star, but to sneer at it. He tapped it lightly with the toe of his polished shoe. The metallic sound was sharp, offensive, like fingernails across glass. "This," he said loudly enough for reporters to hear, "is what you people worship. A piece of metal, an ornament. You stand like statues for this." A collective gasp spread through the onlookers. Veterans in the crowd stiffened, some reaching instinctively for caps they held at their sides, their faces twisted in anger. Parents exchanged uneasy glances. A young boy clutched his mother's hand tighter. Sensing the hostility, the cameras snapped relentlessly, each flash capturing the tension. Holden tilted his head, making sure they caught his grin. He thrived in conflict. Controversy was his fuel. His political career had been built on tearing down sacred cows, mocking traditions others dared not touch. And now, in front of the eternal flame, he sought to make the silent guard his newest victim. "Tell me, soldier," Holden drawled, leaning forward, "do you actually believe this medal matters? Do you believe your frozen silence means something to the dead? Or is it just theater for the living?" Reeves did not respond. His eyes fixed forward, his stance rigid. To move was to betray everything he stood for. To speak was to break the vow of silence his role demanded. But inside him, the words dug deep. The medal mattered because it was not his. It belonged to Jimmy. It belonged to every name etched in the marble around him. Holden circled him slowly, predator circling prey. "Look at this man," he called to the crowd, dressed up like some toy soldier, too scared to bend down and pick up what he supposedly guards. "You call that honor? I call it cowardice." The crowd bristled. A veteran near the back muttered something under his breath. Another shook his head, jaw tight, as though restraining himself from charging forward. A child asked in a whisper, "Mum, why is he being so mean?" The mother hushed him gently. Her eyes locked on the guard. Reporters edged closer, microphones extended, hungry for sound bites. Their lenses zoomed in on every detail. The medal's gleam, Holden's sneer, Reeves's unflinching face. The air was electric with unease, the tension stretching like a drawn bowstring. But Holden was not finished. He bent down suddenly, snatched the bronze star from the ground, and held it up between two fingers as though it were something cheap and disposable. This is what you kneel to. A trinket, a coin. If it means so much, then why won't he even touch it? A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. For many, it was unthinkable. This man holding the sacred medal with such casual contempt. Reeves's knuckles whitened on his rifle, though his posture never shifted. His training screamed at him to remain immovable, yet his heart thundered. Memory pressing at the edges of discipline, he saw Jimmy's face, heard the laughter around campfires, the final defiance in his voice before silence took him forever. That medal was not just metal, it was Jimmy Holden smirked wider, sensing the rising tension. He dangled the medal mockingly before the crowd, then let it swing back and forth like a toy. You see, nothing but weightless tradition. And tradition is a cage. It keeps men like him frozen in place while the rest of us move forward. Gasps filled the air again as Holden deliberately let the medal slip from his fingers, letting it clatter once more onto the stone floor. This time the sound seemed louder, more violent, as though each echo hammered into the hearts of those watching. The veterans in the back audibly groaned, one muttering, "Enough of this." Cameras caught every frame. Holden leaned in close to Reeves, his voice low but audible to those nearest. "Do something, soldier. Prove you're not just a mannequin, or will you let me spit on this too?" The insult cut deeper than any before. The crowd froze in horrified silence, waiting to see if Reeves would break. Sweat beaded along his brow, though his face remained a mask of stillness. Inside, his chest burned with memory and rage, but his oath held him steady. Children clung tighter to their parents. A veteran removed his cap and held it to his heart, as though silently offering strength to the guard. Reporters' cameras clicked, in a frenzy, capturing the standoff in relentless bursts. Holden, intoxicated by the attention, raised his voice again. "You all came here to see discipline, to see sacrifice. Look closely. All you're really watching is obedience dressed up as courage. He doesn't move because he can't, because he has no choice." He paced back and forth, his gestures grand, as though delivering a courtroom performance. "And you cheer for this, you worship silence as if it's strength. What a joke." The crowd was split, some horrified, some furious, some too stunned to speak. Yet through it all Reeves remained as unmoving as stone, his stillness now transformed from simple duty into defiance. The longer he stood, the louder the silence became, until even Holden seemed to sense that his words were being swallowed by something larger than him. But the man was not ready to stop. He stepped even closer, his shoulder brushing the guard's. He lowered his voice into a sneer meant to provoke. "You're not a hero, you're a coward hiding behind rules. And when I push, you'll break." The crowd collectively held its breath. Reporters leaned forward, eyes wide. A little girl whispered to her father, "He's not going to move, is he?" And the father, jaw clenched, whispered back, "Not for him." Holden's eyes glinted with malice as he lifted his hand, hovering just inches from Reeves's chest, daring to cross the invisible line no one ever crossed. His finger almost touched the pristine buttons of the guard's uniform, lingering there with the threat of contact. The crowd gasped audibly. A veteran shouted, "Enough." But Holden only smiled, his hand trembling with anticipation, as though about to deliver the final insult that would force the guard to break centuries of discipline. The escalation had reached its peak. Stillness against arrogance, silence against mockery. The next moment would decide everything, whether the weight of tradition would hold, or whether one man's cruelty would shatter it before the eyes of the world. Holden's hand hovered in the air, trembling with the anticipation of his own cruelty. The crowd seemed to stop breathing. The photographers froze mid-click, unsure if even their cameras should disturb the moment. For an instant, time stretched, unbearably thin, until Holden's finger pressed hard against the center of Daniel Reeves's chest. The touch was small, but it broke centuries of unspoken law. No one touched the guard. No one. The gasp that followed was sharp and collective, as though the crowd itself had been struck. Veterans stiffened, children buried their faces in their parents' coats. Even the reporters, hungry for scandal, lowered their lenses in stunned disbelief. Holden's smile widened, intoxicated by his own audacity. "See," he hissed, pressing harder. "Nothing. You're a prop in a costume, that's all." Reeves did not move. Not yet. The pressure on his chest burned like fire, but deeper than that fire was the voice of memory. He heard Jimmy's laughter in the desert, his steady commands in chaos, his final words before silence claimed him. He saw the bronze star glinting, once more on the floor, tainted by Holden's mockery. The anger inside him was vast, but anger alone would not guide him. Discipline would. Then it happened. Reeves's jaw tightened. His eyes locked straight ahead, and with a voice honed in war and tempered by ritual, he spoke. "Stand down." The words cracked through the silence like thunder. They were not shouted, yet they carried with such force that every person present felt the weight of command. It was the voice of a captain ordering soldiers under fire. It was the voice of centuries of tradition, echoing through marble and memory. The crowd recoiled, stunned. Reporters raised cameras again, frantic to capture the moment. Veterans stood straighter, as if saluting without moving their hands. Children's eyes widened, sensing that something sacred had just filled the air. Holden flinched, the smirk faltering for the first time. His hand snapped back, as though burned. For a second, uncertainty flickered across his face. He had expected silence, weakness, maybe a breaking of posture. He had not expected the sheer authority of that voice. But arrogance is stubborn. He forced a laugh, though it rang hollow. "Oh, so the statue speaks," he sneered, louder this time, trying to recover his dominance. "A single word doesn't change the truth." Reeves did not respond. He had said all that needed saying. The silence that followed his command was heavier than before, pregnant with meaning. The crowd leaned forward unconsciously, drawn to the guard as though he were gravity itself. Holden's bravado wavered. He tried again, stepping closer, but this time the energy had shifted. The crowd no longer saw him as bold, they saw him as small. His gestures, once theatrical, now seemed desperate. His words, once sharp, now dulled by the calm defiance standing before him. The guard's stillness had become a wall. Holden could not climb. A veteran's voice broke the silence from the back of the crowd. "That's honor, right there." Others murmured in agreement, their tones swelling with respect. A ripple of emotion spread through the audience. Anger at Holden, for Reeves, and a recognition that they had just witnessed something unforgettable. Holden, frustrated, lashed out. "Again, you think you've won because you barked an order. You're nothing but a man frozen by rules." He gestured wildly at the cameras. "Look at him. Look at this pathetic charade." But the cameras were not on Holden anymore. They were on Reeves, on the bronze star lying at his feet, on the stillness that now radiated as strength. The narrative had flipped. What Holden intended as humiliation had become revelation. Reeves felt the sweat cooling against his skin, his heartbeat steadying into rhythm with the silence. He remembered Jimmy's face one last time, not in death, but in life, smiling under the desert sun, promising to build a cabin in the mountains. He remembered the vow he made, never to break, never to fail. And here, under the eyes of the world, that vow held. The crowd erupted not in cheers. Not yet, but in gasps and murmurs of reverence. Reporters whispered fiercely into microphones, their words transmitted live. "The guard has spoken." He ordered the man to stand down. The crowd is in shock. Holden's mask of confidence slipped further. He bent to snatch the medal again, perhaps hoping to reclaim control. But this time security officers stepped forward from the edge of the gathering. They did not touch him, not yet, but their presence loomed. Even they had felt the shift. Holden straightened, his face flushing red. "You can't stop me," he barked, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "I'll say what I want, do what I want. You'll just stand down." The guard's voice cut across him again, steady as stone. This time the crowd answered, with an audible gasp of respect. Some clapped instinctively before catching themselves. Others whispered, "My God." Holden froze. The defiance in Reeves's tone was not born of rage but of unshakable discipline. It was not a plea nor a threat. It was a command, and the world had heard it. Silence followed again, but it was no longer fragile. It was alive. The eternal flame flickered in the background, its glow mirrored in the faces of those watching. The balance had shifted entirely. Holden, once the predator, now looked like a cornered man. Reeves, unmoving, had become the immovable symbol of something greater than flesh and bone. The moment stretched on, carved into memory. The medal lay still at his feet, untouched, waiting. Holden's hand trembled as he lowered it, not daring to provoke again. The crowd's eyes bore into him, their judgment unmistakable. Then, slowly, the guard resumed his silent stance, as though nothing had occurred. His voice had spoken only when tradition required it. No more, no less. The order had been given, the test had been met, the vow had held. The hush that followed was no longer tense. It was reverent, and in that silence, the world realized that it had just witnessed not the breaking of discipline, but its most powerful expression. The words still hung in the air. Stand down. The echo seemed to vibrate in the stone itself. The crowd, frozen only moments ago, now shifted with a ripple of energy. Something irreversible had happened. A single command had shattered whole performance and turned the spotlight against him. The judge tried to recover, forcing a smirk, but the mask no longer held. His hand twitched nervously at his side. He opened his mouth, but the words caught. The silence was no longer his to control. It belonged to the guard. The veterans in the crowd moved first. One stepped forward, removing his cap with deliberate dignity. He faced Reeves, not Halden, and placed the cap over his heart. Another followed, then another, until a small line of men and women stood in silent salute. Their stillness mirrored the guards, but theirs was voluntary, born of deep respect. Reporters leaned into their microphones, narrating breathlessly. Judge Marcus Holden crossed the line literally by placing his hands on the guard, and in response, Captain Reeves has commanded him to stand down. The crowd is visibly shifting. Security is moving in, and indeed they were. Two officers broke through the onlookers, their dark uniforms contrasting against the pale stone. They approached Holden, cautious but firm, their eyes cold with authority. Holden tried to wave them off. "Don't you dare. Do you know who I am?" His voice cracked, too high, too frantic. "I have the right." "No." One officer cut him short. "You've crossed the line." The crowd murmured, some clapping, some shouting agreement. Holden's arrogance had finally collapsed into desperation. He reached toward the medal on the floor, as if claiming it one last time might restore his power. But his hand was blocked by the swift step of a veteran who moved in front of him, shaking his head. The message was clear. "Not yours. Never yours." The officers seized his arms. Cameras flashed wildly as Holden struggled, his polished shoes scraping against the stone. "You can't do this," he shouted, his words shrill now. "This is just a show. He's just a statue. You're all." But the rest of his protest was drowned out by the rising voice of the crowd. Applause swelled, growing louder with each second. It was not wild cheering but measured, reverent clapping, a sound of recognition and relief. The veterans saluted. The children looked up in awe, and above it all, the guard remained still, unmoved, his face fixed forward as though none of it touched him. The symbolism struck everyone at once. Holden had flailed, shouted, grasped for attention, and been dragged away in disgrace. The guard had not broken posture, save for the two words that cut through arrogance with timeless weight. Discipline had defeated chaos. Stillness had silenced noise. And then, a moment so quiet yet so powerful unfolded. From the side of the crowd, a small boy no older than 7 slipped free from his mother's hand. He walked carefully toward the medal lying on the floor. His small fingers picked it up with care, as though lifting something sacred. He turned, eyes wide, and placed it gently back onto its stand before stepping back with a solemn nod. Gasps turned into tears. A mother whispered, "That's respect." A veteran wiped his eyes. Reporters lowered their cameras for a heartbeat. Caught in the rawness of the gesture, Reeves did not move, but inside, something stirred. The sight of that child's reverence touched a place in him deeper than the war, deeper than the vow. It was proof that honor still lived. Passed on to the next generation. Holden's shouts faded as security dragged him beyond the stone columns. His words no longer mattered. What remained, what the world would remember, was the guard who had spoken only when duty demanded. And the silence that followed, the clapping subsided into quiet reverence. The eternal flame flickered, its reflection dancing on the medal's surface. The crowd stood hushed again, but now it was not tension holding them. It was awe. Reeves shifted one step, a ceremonial pivot, resuming his perfect stance as though nothing had happened. The rifle rested against his shoulder, his gaze fixed ahead, posture unbroken. To any who looked closely, it was clear the guard had returned to duty, untouched, as if the chaos had been nothing more than passing wind. The cameras captured it all. Within hours, the image would travel across the world, a soldier standing, immovable, a fallen medal restored by a child, and a man of arrogance led away in disgrace. The moment was destined for history, etched not just in memory but in legacy, that the climax had ended not with noise but with silence, not with rage but with stillness, and that stillness was stronger than any storm. The plaza had emptied by nightfall, but the silence that remained carried its own gravity. What had begun as another day of ritual ended as a lesson witnessed by millions. The air was still heavy with memory of arrogance broken, of honor reaffirmed. Captain Reeves had resumed his post long after the crowd dispersed. His body obeyed the discipline drilled into him years ago, but inside, something had shifted. The clash with Judge Holden was over, but its meaning lingered like the echo of a drumbeat. Footsteps approached. Colonel Harris, his superior, moved with deliberate pace across the stone. His uniform was pressed to perfection, his medals glinting softly under the fading light. He halted just short of Reeves, his expression unreadable. For several seconds, he simply studied the man before him, the stillness, the quiet composure, the unbroken line of duty. Then, in a gesture rarely seen, the colonel raised his hand in salute. It was not perfunctory, it was not ceremonial, it was personal. "Captain," Harris said quietly, lowering his hand. "Today will not be forgotten." Reeves did not break stance, but his eyes shifted, acknowledging the weight of the words. The colonel lingered for a moment, then turned to leave. His salute, though brief, carried more than 1,000 congratulations. It was the military highest language, respect given from one who understood the price of silence. Later that night, when the guard rotation ended, Reeves returned to the barracks. He removed his rifle, folded his gloves, and sat at the narrow wooden desk. From the drawer he pulled a small chain-worn dog tag, edges dulled from years of wear. He held it in his palm, tracing the engraved name with his thumb. The name belonged to Michael, his closest friend, the one he had lost in that desert ambush years ago. The reason he had joined the guard, the reason he had sworn to stand where silence was demanded and chaos forbidden. He placed the tag beside the folded gloves and stared at it for a long while. "I hope I honored you today," he murmured, barely. Above a whisper, the words hung in the air, as if waiting for an unseen answer. His hand moved next to the bronze star resting nearby. Earlier that day it had struck the stone, almost desecrated by an unworthy touch. Now it gleamed again, cleaned, restored. Reeves picked it up carefully, turning it in the lamplight. The medal reflected not just valor in combat but the endurance of principle. Somewhere outside, a child's laughter drifted faintly through the open window. It reminded him of the boy who had picked up the medal with such reverence, restoring it to its rightful place. Reeves closed his eyes for a moment. He could still hear the boy's whisper carried softly across the crowd. "Hero." That single word pierced deeper than applause or commendations ever could. It was innocent, unprompted, true. And it reminded Reeves that his stillness was not for himself. It was for those who watched, who learned, who carried forward the meaning of sacrifice. He placed the star beside the dog tag, two symbols of his life, one official, one personal. Together they formed the story of who he had become. Soldier, guardian, witness to both loss and honor. The night stretched on, quiet and steady. Reeves rose finally, his body heavy but his spirit strangely light. Tomorrow would bring another watch, another rotation. Perhaps no crowd would gather. Perhaps no confrontation would occur, but it did not matter. His vow remained unchanged. Stillness was his weapon, silence was his shield, and as long as he stood his post, honor would not fall. History is rarely written in grand speeches or violent clashes. Sometimes it is written in silence, in the refusal to be moved when the world demands reaction. That day at the memorial, millions witnessed not just a confrontation between a guard and a man of power, but the unshakable weight of duty. Captain Reeves did not speak. He did not lash out. He did not crumble under provocation. His stillness itself became the answer. In an age when noise often drowns meaning, his silence thundered. It reminded the world that restraint can be braver than aggression, that discipline can defeat arrogance, and that tradition, when anchored in respect, has a strength no insult can break. For those who watched, the lesson was clear. Honor is not merely a word carved into stone. It is a choice lived daily, a line held firm even when tested, and while Judge Holden sought to humiliate, he instead revealed his own fragility. His mockery fell silent before the unwavering resolve of a single man standing guard. But perhaps the most powerful moment did not come from Reeves himself. It came from the child who lifted the fallen medal and returned it with reverence. From innocence came recognition pure, unshaped by politics or pride. That whisper, "Hero," carried the truth of the entire day. Stories like this endure because they remind us of what matters. They strip away titles, power, and noise, leaving only the essentials: sacrifice, memory, and dignity. And they challenge us to ask ourselves, when the moment comes to stand for something greater than comfort or pride, will we hold the line? Tradition is not weakness. Stillness is strength. and in the silence of a guard who refused to be moved, a nation remembered why some vows are sacred. Before you leave, pause for a moment. What does honor mean to you? How would you define it in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story moved you, pass it on. Let others remember that strength sometimes speaks loudest in silence.